It is not without reason that the Maltese Islands have been called an archaeological paradise. Over the centuries, antiquarians and archaeologists have explored hundreds and hundreds of sites, both on land and underwater. Among these sites are the mysterious pairs of ruts in the rock, known to many as the cart-ruts. I really cannot think of other archaeological sites that have attracted so much attention and controversy as those which feature such ruts, both as single features or as an elaborate complex stretching over a large area. Comparisons with similar ruts abroad have also helped to put the Maltese phenomenon under the spotlight. The presence of cart-ruts in Malta and Gozo, and in particular the large numbers and distribution, has fueled much debate amongst the scholarly community, intent on figuring out what the ruts were for, when they were made, and what contraption or form of transport passed over them and through them. Unorthodox views have been entertained by those with a fruitful imagination. Even extraterrestrials and giants have been called upon to explain what appears unexplainable. This documentary unravels the story of the mystery of the cart-ruts in all its detail, and demonstrates how the search for solutions is very much alive. May that search continue for years to come.
Is there evidence that the so-called cart-ruts existed thousands of years ago? You begin to ask yourself, are we missing part of the story? Could ancient man have possessed knowledge far beyond that of our own century? And if so, where did it come from? The desire of mankind to perceive is justification enough for him to explore and find answers. It has often been said that the Maltese Islands have been inhabited in one way or another for millennia. Yet this long stretch of history is not enough to explain the existence of cart-ruts in various places in Malta. Up to this day, the cart-ruts have remained an unsolved mystery to all authors and scholars who try to describe their function and behavior. Attempts at giving a solution to these enigmatic features have been a continuous endeavor, and various hypotheses have been suggested. Cart-ruts might be even a misnomer. Thus, the objective of this documentary is to explore the manufacture and function of these so-called cart-ruts. Cart-ruts are parallel tracks running through rock, sometimes in single pairs, but often found in groups and occur in different patterns. One finds instances when a single pair branches into two or more separate tracks. Cases when a group of cart-ruts open in a fan-like manner are also recorded. At other instances, the presence of two or more parallel ruts is due to the introduction of a new pair to substitute an earlier one which had deteriorated. In such cases, the pairs often overlap each other and do not run close to each other without touching. Among the major attempts, theories have been forwarded to date that this is probably the eighth wonder of the Mediterranean. Indeed, a look at the various locations connects ruts with possible Roman settlements. But this is just one of the many fascinating theories. In the Maltese archipelago, 150 sites have been recorded that contain cart-ruts. In Gozo, one finds cart-ruts situated at San Laurence, Tacench, between Shaukia and Ainsilem, and in Ala. In Malta, one finds a number of sites where these so-called ruts are to be found, namely at Shemshia, Baida Ridge, Salina, Matap, Sampalta Tarja, Fomirrih, Binjemma, Adira, Imsirah, Imtarfa, Imtahleb, Busket, Jebel Chantar, Birzebuja, Zaytun, Bidni near Masaskala, and Tarrumi near St. Thomas Bay. Most of these ruts are in hard upper coralline limestone, although one should state that these might have disappeared due to erosion and human activity. For so many ruts in so many places, worn so deep in hard rock, the enigmatic question still haunts mankind. Who, when, and why? It may suggest a very active society that moved lots of heavy material around. In an attempt to date these mysterious ruts, scholars have suggested Bronze Age man using stone wheels. It might seem that this was a homegrown technology that developed on the island over a considerable period and without apparent outside influence. In her detailed research, Sagona relates the presence of cart-ruts near Neolithic temples, Bronze Age settlements, and Romano-Punic period, with the latter being the most popular. Although the general assumption is that some form of ancient vehicle scarred the Maltese landscape, Kali in 1996 and later Trump in 2002 mention that there has been some disquiet about the nature of the vehicles used. In the scientific analysis conducted by Mottershed, Pearson and Schaefer in 2008, they use reverse engineering to get an idea of the rut vehicle. They discovered that the relative tightness of the rut across the section floor suggests that erosion was concentrated in a restricted lateral section, which implies a narrowly concentrated force such as would be applied by a wheel. It seems that the wheels were an agent of corrosion, and according to these researchers, the wheels were made of wood. The issue is whether wood can erode limestone by repeated compression. Seasoned timber exceeds compressive strength of the Clapham and Binjemma rocks, and thus it would be rock which would preferentially fail. The same could not be said at the Nashar site, and mutual erosion is more likely to have taken place. The timber required to build such a vehicle yielded a mass of around 250 kilograms. It would have required a mass of around 665 kilograms to cause rock failure in such areas. These calculations therefore demonstrate that the relatively weak rocks are readily eroded under vehicles of quite modest dimensions and loads. In the Neolithic and Bronze Age period, around 7,000 years ago, the water bird-like male sun god appears in Eastern Europe and China on a conveyance to get him across the sky, a wheeled chariot drawn by ducks or geese or similar. Recent discoveries in the southeastern province of Mardin in Turkey have revealed what are currently the oldest examples of the wheel in the world. Until recently, it was believed that the Sumerians were the inventors of the wheel, with examples dating back to circa 3700 BC. But the discovery of a stone-carved toy wheel vehicle dating back to circa 5500 BC, now being shown to have originated in this area long before the Sumerian or Egyptian cultures existed. Whether one accepts a temple period or Bronze Age date, the concept that vehicles produce these ruts runs against the practice of other ancient cultures. Generally, human porterage or beasts of burden were used to transport goods. Given the small size of Malta and Gozo, it is inconceivable that such a high volume of traffic took place to produce these so-called ruts. Also, early wheeled V-shaped vehicles, regardless of which ancient culture they derived from, were likely built and served for a military scope or for ceremonial display purposes. It was also in the Roman times that the full load-pulling capacity of animals was established, as roads were well made and animal harnesses were inadequate for the task until that time. Whether it was the use of the slide car or wheeled vehicle or the use of animals shackled into primitive harnesses, all seem to face a conundrum, according to Whitehouse and Wilkins. In 1647, Abela, in his book Descrizione di Malta, suggests that the Stone Age man might have used stone wheels to run through these ruts, and apparently these were used to transport stones from quarries to the sea for exportation to Africa during the Arab rule in Malta. Abela was just as puzzled as we still are today. Others amongst them, Guido Lanfranco, a keen follower of the history of the ruts, dismiss the slide car theory, the sail-aided slide, as well as any connection with the Stone Age. He prefers to attribute these ruts to the Romans, since they were found around or near Roman settlements in Malta. Temizamit suggested that the cart-ruts were used during the Temple period to carry soil from the valleys up to the hilltops in order to make fields along the slopes and along on the various plateaus. Parker and Rubinstein stated that the ruts were man-made channels for transporting stones and soil to build terraces. However, the cargo that was being hauled remains unknown, and we are faced with the fact that what the ancients carted around the islands is less clear, as mention is made of quarried stone, soil, seaweed, agricultural produce, and so on, which in fact all have been suggested. In the 80s, the German scholar Gunther Scholl dismissed altogether the idea of the ruts. In Malta's ever-present water shortage, he sees a network of rainwater catchments leading to cisterns or primitive reservoirs. According to Captain Gracie, it is assumed that about 40% of the ruts lie beneath stretches of cultivation and buildings. This survey was done in 1954, let alone what percentage that would read today. But if all the ruts were uncovered and exposed, what would the pattern be? Would we land anywhere close to a credible answer to the riddle? Both Gracie and Trump thought that the ruts were a means of communication between settlements. This is similar to what Barreca thought about the cart-ruts at Monte Sirai in Sardinia, and explained them as being a road system between the Phoenician Punic settlement and the Nuragic hamlet situated nearby. Although one cannot exclude the possibility that in certain cases cart-ruts were communication tracks between settlements, still one cannot generalize and apply with a few examples to the whole system of the Maltese Islands. In fact, during the Phoenician, Punic, and Roman periods, the use of ashlar blocks was very much common. One cannot exclude the possibility that the area was used as a quarrying site also before the Phoenician period. The Maltese ruts are a unique prehistoric mystery. Thousands of years ago, the Maltese Islands were covered with such ruts. Zamit in 1928, Evans in 1971, and Trump in 2002 looked at these furrows, which in many cases are parallel, and some 137 centimeters to 141 centimeters apart. This indicates an idea of ruts and rather similar to railway tracks. The channels are U or V-shaped profiles in section and possess an average depth of about 8 to 15 centimeters. There are also rare instances when a depth of 60 centimeters is recorded. Recent work by Trump, Saliba, and Magro Conti, Sagona, and Hughes, as well as the extensive digital survey conducted at Clapham Junction, testify the intense effort being researched to solve this enigma. In 2001, Bugeja suggests that U or V-shaped profiles might have resulted from intense agricultural use. Others suggest that ruts, which are wide, shallow and rectangular profiles, may be of Roman or a later date formed by wheel-drawn vehicles. Sagona criticized the latter hypothesis as doubtful, as we are well aware that the Romans excelled in road building and were second to none. Sagona claims that it is inconceivable that the Romans would operate on a less technologically advanced level in Malta. However, research by Schneider in 2001 confirms that the cart-ruts in Switzerland, namely at Lagenbruck, Gillerpass and Donats, suggest a Roman origin to the ruts here. Other cart-ruts are registered at Bari as well, as in Pompeii, which may sustain further Roman origin. At Clapham Junction, one finds a number of mysterious rock triangles, where a number of cart-ruts are aligned, intersect, and form puzzling sharp switch points. This equilateral cart-ruts triangle is beside the longest of the cart-ruts at this site. Not just equilateral triangles, but also isosceles triangles, which are located near the main junction at this site and which continue to deepen the mystery even further. Cart-ruts appear in other places of the world, but far more rarely. It seems that Malta has more cart-ruts on it than the rest of the world put together. Also, the tracks are rarely the same as those in Malta, except for those leading from an ancient quarry to the town of Messina. In most places they are 65 to 123 centimeters wide and 70 centimeters deep. Near Mencia, for example, one rut runs in a curve over the spur of a hill and cuts 72 centimeters deep into the limestone rock. In the same area, the width goes down to 11 centimeters only, with a shallow depth of 20 centimeters. This continues to baffle the minds and further complicate matters. At one point, a pair of these ruts that are coming from the north and a pair whose direction is from the south join in as one pair of ruts. Those that were coming from the north continue to the east, whereas those from the south take a southeasterly direction. These ruts have been carved to cater for any deviation so that two objects moving in the same direction could never hit each other on the same pair of ruts. The evidence for human power as one source of propulsion seems almost certain, as Trump had identified human-like footholds in some steeper sections of these so-called ruts. Others are of the belief that the so-called Maltese ox, now almost extinct, has a good balance and will follow a narrow track reliably, a trait they may have been selectively bred for. It may seem that both oxen and men may have done the carting, with men assisting the difficult stretches and the oxen doing the routine work. In fact, these tracks could have kept both cart and animal on course for great distances. Was it a cart with wheels, or a sledge with fixed runners, or the slide car with two sliding poles having stone runners fixed at the bottom that were used in these ruts? Hughes has researched extensively on this issue. The carts were of a type that required them to travel over a particular type of material like sand or other slippery material in order to slide smoothly and efficiently with minimum wear. Moving these carts over the rock was indeed problematic, so cart-ruts were carved in the rock to contain the slippery material and provide a much smoother passage. Both Hughes in 1999 and later Bugeja in 2001 could both be correct when they suggested that the ruts might prove to belong to no single period or attributable to a single function. If wheels were used, the carts were of a type that required them to travel over smooth, hard track. It seems that the cart-ruts were carved out roughly and then filled with cement-like materials such as torba, which has since washed out, leaving no apparent trace. The ruts themselves may have been initially formed by grinding carts with slides made of abrasive hard rock. In normal use, after that, the tracks were filled. The carts were pulled by oxen that walked in the filled tracks, supplemented with human help in the steeper or troublesome sections. However, whether wheeled or otherwise, this is countered by some stubborn facts, as examples of single ruts found running at angles of up to 45 degrees, and cart ruts running deep underwater have been found. Near Dingley, or as otherwise known as Clapham Junction, the site resembles the railway switching yard in the United Kingdom. The mystery grows deeper, with a more confusing network with longer winding traces. There appear to be more cart tracks at this site than the rest of the island put together, covering an area of about 250,000 square meters or more. It seems that this site was used as a quarry for upper coralline limestone, according to Saliba and Conti. According to some locals, this site was used to cut large slabs of rock up to the last century. The man-made interventions on the terrain indicate that the site constituted an important source of building stone, hence explaining, at least in part, the presence of such an elaborate and complex system of cart ruts. This particular rock was rough and fissured enough so that it could be broken up with simple primitive tools. Magro Conti and Saliba, as well as Sagona, believe that the most convincing evidence is that some ruts were field furrows and others possibly water channels for irrigation at this particular site. This is because the clusters of ruts have all the hallmarks of furrows and reflect the creation of fields. They are cut in orderly parallel lines, varying in the range between 1.37 meters to 1.41 meters. It seems that the longer paired lines of ruts, as well as those that intersect and cut other groups, may have more to do with the channeling of water. A recent study by Pat Mullen on farming methods in the Aran Islands off the west coast of Ireland has demonstrated that the soil creation on bare rock is possible in a landscape prone to severe erosion. Once the soil was made, ridges over a meter wide are created between the pairs of furrows that were cut manually with a spade. Soil that accumulated in the trenches was dug out and turned over into the ridges in preparation for the next planting. The regular spacing kept within an arm's length facilitated the planting and tending of the crops. Labor-intensive fieldwork and repeated additions of seaweed fertilizer generally improved the quality of the new soil. If a similar form of farming took place on these rocky surfaces, then it is feasible that once the trenches were cut, they were continually deepened through tilling and clearing. Hence, this might explain the irregular depths of some ruts. Sagona associates the manufacture of these cart ruts with the Neolithic temple building culture. Sagona also believes that at some point in time, probably approaching the mid-3rd millennium, the temple economy began to unravel. As land resources were finite, the creation of new arable land in the temple period would have satisfied immediate or predicted economic demand. The abrupt ending of the temple period, circa 2500 BC, might have been triggered by total economic collapse and depopulation of the islands to some degree. Both Evans in 1971 and Bonanno in 1993 are of the same belief. With the decrease in population numbers in Malta, it would have been inevitable that the dry stone field walls would have fallen into disrepair, and the cycle of erosion and soil depletion would have begun anew. The arrival of the Bronze Age people might have given the final blow to the Temple period people and subsequently the use of such ruts. The general consensus is that most cart-ruts were a result of transporting stone from a quarry to the shore, such as the ruts at Anse de Sainte-Croix in France, in Azerbaijan and in Malta. However, this is not clear for all ruts, as many of these ruts have no association with quarrying. And if so, another controversy sparks up, as one may ask, were these quarries large enough to produce the number of ruts around them? The idea that these ruts were used for transporting goods seems rational, except that the ruts have no passing points, suggesting that they were for one-way transportation only. Some of them also seem to run straight into the blue waters of the Mediterranean. There are others who claim that these ruts continue to run down to the sea, like those found at Salina and Tacenc in Gozo. The latest sea level estimates around Malta, calculated from Lambeck in 2004, indicate that the post-Ice Age sea levels were still rising rapidly at the time the islands were first settled some 7,200 years ago. Over 30 square kilometers of land were flooded since that time, mostly during the Temple period, when seas rose from approximately minus 17 meters to minus 5 meters below current sea levels. Thus, one would expect to find Temple period settlements and other constructions submerged in these areas. Certainly, if cart-ruts can be found in these areas below the sea, or indeed anywhere around Malta at depths of over 5 meters, one could state with considerable confidence that it was the temple builders who made them. Some evidence has been found, but is so far inconclusive. Indeed, identifying underwater archaeological remains is a very difficult task at best, and a very large area that was flooded around Malta during this time makes this search a tremendous challenge. In 1999, Maltese divers Sean and Kurt Arrigo discovered some interesting structures beneath the sea a short distance off the present coast of Malta near St. Julian's. They include tracks that look similar to those found elsewhere on the island. The physical measurements of these ruts, however, do not match the typical tracks, so while this find does look to be man-made, they are not cart-ruts. Another find, reported by Hubert Zeitelmer, claims to have found a temple site, also at a 10-meter depth, 2 kilometers to the east of Malta, though this find is suspect and still unconfirmed. Clearly, the deeper these ruts are found beneath the sea, the stronger the argument becomes that these ruts date from a much earlier period than we might otherwise presume. There are reports of man-made structures under the sea in several places around the world, so the notion of Ice Age and post-Ice Age civilizations with massive stone fabrication capabilities is becoming more credible. The undersea stone structures of the Japanese island of Okinawa lie 20 meters below the sea and are apparently over 8,000 years old. At Mtahlep, 2 pairs of ruts cut abruptly in the cliffs. It is a fact that these ruts continued before a huge boulder came down. If one did notice this, one could have easily concluded that the intention of these ruts was to run down and finish abruptly at these cliffs. In the neighborhood known as Tabrolli near Wet Dullam and at Borche Nadur, one can also find these ruts. It is clear that these 2 places were once joined by these so-called ruts. At St. George's Bay in Birzabuja, a pair of ruts, or what has remained, continue towards the sea. According to Sir Ceremonial, these ruts re-emerge on the other side of the bay. He believes that the ruts were never intended to run down to the sea. We now know that sea levels have risen less than 5 meters since the beginning of the Bronze Age, whereas there was more than a 12-meter rise of sea level during and immediately preceding the time of temple building. It is compelling to attribute these ruts and others entering the sea elsewhere to an age when the current shoreline was much further from the sea. Archaeologists seem to disagree upon this matter. Zammit, Hughes, Sagona support a temple period date, whereas Bonanno and Trump and others propose various other more recent dates coinciding with the Bronze Age and later. Sagona also firmly believes that these ancient cart-rut clusters are likely to be the fossilized remains of field furrows, which indeed will open a window on prehistoric agricultural practices. And in 1998, Trump wrote that it is a risky business to challenge the entrenched view that the ruts found in the Maltese Islands are the byproduct of transport. Risky in the sense that there has been no proposed theory since 1647 which has achieved general acceptance. Bonanno contested the claim that the cart-ruts are earlier than Punic period, basing his argument that Temizamit meant anything from the 7th century BC to the 3rd century BC. Trump states that some cart-ruts passed near quarries, but surprisingly enough, Zammit also states there exists no associations between cart-ruts and quarries in Malta. On the contrary, Magroconti and Saliba agree with Bonanno that the cart-ruts are associated with quarries. Magroconti and Saliba believe that cart-ruts and quarries could have been a system which saw its birth in the Neolithic period and continued to be used until the Classical and possibly later periods. Both Trump and Sagona bring forward the argument that Punic tombs provide a terminus circa 700 BC for these ruts, thus discontinuing the Phoenician Punic population at the outset as the creators of the cuttings. Trump dates these cart-ruts to the late Bronze Age. He strengthens his argument by saying that a few of these sites ruts run up to the entrances of the Bronze Age villages. The Portuguese cart-ruts can also be traced at least back to the Bronze Age through carvings found alongside the ruts and places. Other ruts are found at Mtarfa. These ruts are the most spectacular that the Maltese Islands held. One can still find a tomb of the 6th century BC dug out in a pair of these ruts. This is clear evidence that the ruts had already served their purpose before the 6th century BC. In 1954, Captain Gracie wrote that the ruts at Salina used to meet those at Mosta. Probably these used to go till Matap and to Sampalta Tarja. Interesting are these catacombs near these ruts. These continue to strengthen what Captain Gracie wrote, that these ruts had already lost their use when the catacombs were built at Salina. But the enigma still haunts us in asking, who were the original builders of these ruts? An interesting observation was made by Graham Hancock, who makes reference to Father Emmanuel Magri, who recorded the presence up until the end of the 19th century of cart-ruts on the uninhabited island of Filfla. In 1912, Bradley commented on cart-ruts near Hajar-Im, noting that they ran over the precipitous edge of the cliff towards Filfla. This only seems possible if the tracks date to that time that Filfla was still connected to Malta. During the research of this documentary, the ruts were studied and analyzed using a mathematical approach. It has become abundantly clear that certain locations were so constructed so that they would be in a straight line to each other, which further complicates the mystery of who were the originators of these ruts. Thrown in for good measure are observations at Sampalta Tarja, which resulted in 4 pairs of ruts joining up into one, although they have different gauges. One should note the possible deviations that could have been done along the ruts. These sharp bends should show repair evidence, since they are the most likely to cause problems for carts after they were worn down, and hence may have required refilling or other repair with materials such as torba. If settlers from different time periods reused the tracks, as is likely in at least some cases, the wear patterns will be ambiguous. This site has ruts traveling down steep hills and tight curves, which help us to draw a conclusion that a 4-wheel slide cart would have had trouble navigating the corners without at least one steering mechanism and should have 2 for better navigation. Since the tracks do not narrow, this could mean that a 2-wheeled or 2 slide carts were used. At Shemshia, little cart-ruts are left and time has made its mark. One can still see a Neolithic tomb near one of these ruts. It is said that the locals at Tachench refer to, quote, galley that slides on the earth, unquote. One does not know whether they are in fact referring to the sailed apparatus that used to slide along these ruts, or to what the locals refer to centipede of the Scolopendra and the Schutikera type referred to locally as Shinitalindowa. If one had to observe closely, one would notice the similarity in the manner that the centipede moves, which resembles a galley with its oars moving in the sea. An interesting pair of ruts that have been covered as part of a new road is that they do not remain parallel but narrow from 141 centimeters to 65 centimeters. Have these so-called ruts existed before the Ice Age? Were they means of transport with which slaves carried stones to far-off seas in North Africa? Could deep-sea observations tell us more than our surface traces? Why do these ruts cross from one side of the island to another in Malta and Gozo? These and 1,000 more questions have been asked many times by speculators, observers, and laymen alike. The results? A bigger labyrinth than the one existing at takeoff. And mentioning takeoff, how could one explain the fact that at some point these ruts seemed to lift off? The most fascinating and captivating theory, however, defies all known history. An aerial view of the whole network brings in memories of Atlantis, challenges of extraterrestrials. Who was making use of these facilities? Are these grooves part of some primitive airstrip? Who flew? Primitive men belonging to the era around the deluge of some 12,000 years ago? Was our world a landing site for extraterrestrials? Was Malta a strategic point between North and South land masses? The Egyptian Book of the Dead, which dates around to 1600 to 900 BC, describes the use of vehicles in explicit though unusual terms. In the Upper Egypt city of Edfu, mention is made of great winged discs that were forged. The Book of the Dead records that from the height of heaven, Heru Behutet was able to see his father's enemies, and he chased them in the form of a great winged disc, besides other excerpts which explicitly mention journeys between heaven and earth, celestial boats and sun boats. It was also at Saqqara in 1898 that a 4,000-year-old sycamore wood carving of a model airplane was found in a tomb of the ancient empire. This model, which is in the Cairo Museum, has a reverse dihedral wing and a vertical tail fin. Relative to Egyptian writings is the rishis of old India, who refer to aerial craft powered by stored solar energy. Vedic text, dating back to 1600 BC, mention explicit details and operational aspects of flying machines known as vimanas. According to the Sanskrit text, vimanas were constructed out of alloys, gold, and iron, and are described as gleaming flying machines. More evidence can be found in Mexico at the Mayan archaeological site of Palenque. Deep within a secret tomb, underneath one of the age-old temples, lies the 7-ton sarcophagus of Palenque's 7th century ruler Pakal the Great. From a different point of view, one can see a man sitting in some sort of a capsule and a mask on his nose. With his upper hand, he appears to be manipulating some type of controls, while with his other hand, he is manipulating different controls. The heel of his left foot is on a kind of pedal, and outside of the capsule one can observe flames that appear to give some sort of propulsion. Perhaps Eric von Daniken was right about the depiction carved into King Pakal's sarcophagus lid being that of a Mayan king himself at the controls of a flying craft of some sort. According to von Daniken, religion can be created only on the basis of encounter with civilization which is so highly developed that it seems incomprehensible for the indigenous people. Generally, he claims that myths about gods have real basis, and the origin is in some event or encounter which already happened. We are sure that our questions are not getting us nearer, but nearer to what? Are we really making sense? How should we approach such an enigma? How should we solve a mystery? Even if we treat this whole thing as a game, some progress could perhaps be made by eliminating improbable theories. As a writer, this is exactly what a modern world popular speculator did. Eric von Daniken brings a smile to many an enthusiast and maybe a sneer to many scholars. But he has wit and original ideas. This is what, in a nutshell, he thinks of our unsolved mystery. As like other observers like Marcelin Boule, von Daniken sees little connection with Neolithic temples as the ruts do not lead and do not come from these sites. Carrying monoliths on primitive wheels would have produced the unleveled base of the tracks. He dismisses the use of sledges and forks for similar reasons. Many had proposed the transport of soil to hilly areas for wider cultivation, but high grounds rarely keep the soil in place, and therefore this is very improbable. Any pulling of carts, sledges or forks would also have left some animal hoof marks or evidence of human threads. The Maltese used stone balls for transport. All the stone balls found in Malta vary from 60 centimeters to 70 centimeters are too soft. If ball bearings are the answer to the riddle, these would have been made of limestone, and limestone squashes as fast as a pancake under heavy weight. Did Stone Age man mark the seasons on the ground? It would have been a back-breaking job to do so. The same applies to any code practiced by an ancient religious cult. The presence of cart-ruts in several countries such as Malta, Italy, Sicily, Sardinia, Switzerland, Spain, Portugal, Turkey, Greece, Azerbaijan, and southern France is stirring greater awareness amongst scientists. Following a year-long international study, scientists from these countries came recently to the conclusion that such parallel furrows in the rockbed could not be made as it was thought before by wheels of carts crossing rocky outcrops precisely along the same lines with absolute accuracy. The tracks found in Turkey have been dated to 5.3 million years, which does not fit the current history of mankind. Thus, the mystery deepens further and is causing further academic debate amongst scholars. Till yet in Malta, there is no evidence whatsoever of any contemporary vehicles, and examples of single ruts have been found. Although limited occurrences of similar rutted tracks exist elsewhere in the Mediterranean region, nowhere do they occur in such abundance as the Maltese Islands. Watershed, Pearson and Schaefer in 2008 suggested that it is the uniqueness of this concentration which may therefore be founded on an environmental factor rather than a cultural one. The current outside favorite is that these ruts may have been started at least by human hand. In 2001, Schneider reminds us that a short section of a cart-rut following the path between Hajar Eim and Mnajdra revealed a section with pointed impressions which might be interpreted as evidence for deliberate cart-rut carving with a pick. This was also observed much earlier by some meat in 1928, Evans in 1934, Lewis in 1977, Trump in 1990, and Hughes in 1999. The variety of shapes and sizes of internal dimensions of the ruts lends weight to this theory, although their frequency at certain locations stretches the imagination. The Maltese cart-ruts, those that are found in the heart of the Bolivian jungle in a place called El Fuerte near Santa Cruz, and those found in Nazca in Peru near the Andean mountains, are very similar when one observes them when airborne. It has been suggested that the ruts may have been carved, and that in certain cases, such as the Bolivian ruts, it is certainly reasonable to assume that they were created for ceremonial purposes, as they also have carved symbols running along their entire length. The mysterious Sahama lines in Bolivia were mentioned by Swiss-born Argentine professor, writer, and adventurer Aimé Félix Chifley in 1932. In the 1970s, British writer, photographer, and filmmaker Toni Morrison reported a major network of sacred lines and roadways in the Sahama region of Bolivia. While many of these sacred lines extend as far as 10 or 20 kilometers, and perhaps further, they are all remarkably straight despite rugged topography and natural obstacles. Nazca lines in Peru have been carefully studied, but only little research has been conducted in the Sahama, and dating the Sahama lines and their construction is a long-standing problem for researchers. The Sahama lines are located between 3,800 and 4,300 meters above sea level in the highest mountain in Bolivia. In Nazca, the relation between the planet Venus and the star Regulus were also noticed. Almost every 8 years, both rise heliacally above the horizon, as could be observed on El Fuerte in Bolivia. The planet and the star formed the eyes of the mythical Viracocha. There is a debate that ruts, such as those in Malta, were created purely for ceremonial practices. Could there be some sort of celestial alignment, as in Peru and Bolivia? Von Daniken, who saw the Peruvian lines many a time, told us that when one sees these lines, it is as if one is seeing a primitive airport. Von Daniken believes that this was an extraterrestrial base. Maria Riesch says that the Peruvian lines are a large astronomical calendar resembling the Great Bear constellation. Nonetheless, one doubts such a hypothesis when one considers that to create and understand such a calendar, one has to be airborne. Did man have the facility to fly in those times? Many seem to suggest that the ancients might have flown. The Saqqara bird found in Egypt, other mysterious designs of ancient wheeled vehicles, the Vimana mentioned in the Indian Vedic literature, and Ezekiel's writings. The same hypotheses can be applied here in Malta. What would be the result if all the Maltese ruts were uncovered? Are they similar to some kind of constellation, as that in Peru? Could the Maltese ruts be observed better when airborne? Who knows? The lexicon of archaeology puts our cart-ruts around 2,500 years before Christ. Yet, excavations and investigations show that Malta had long been colonized since 6000 BC. So far, no professional test has really determined the right dates. Many, though, keep looking for the purpose rather than a serious scientific approach. To those who think that the Phoenicians or the Romans might have carved the ruts, we joined this colorful investigator to ask, how come these colonizers never thought of the same idea before in their motherland? Why never in other colonies? What was so special about Malta? The water theory offers difficulties as well. How would the ruts carry water uphill thousands of years ago? Pumps were unheard of. Edging into limitless fiction, some propose the idea of metal-filled furrows. Did they convey any message to a flying society who could decipher writing on the ground? Did it serve as a gigantic antenna? And where did the metal come from? These ruts were done before alloys were discovered. We take leave of fantasy and come back to reality. In the absence of real knowledge as to the existence and functions of Malta's cart-ruts, unfortunately we tend to care less than expected of us. As guardians of such an unknown treasure, we should watch out as to how far we could approach these furrows. Nobody can stop progress, and on any small populated island such as Malta, land is precious for habitation. Many of us, happy to have such an abundance of these historical stretches on the ground, seem to close an eye and erect buildings on many hundreds of tracks. However, before we find out what these ruts are, comparisons of importance are out of place. Earlier on, it was stated that these ruts could have formed part of a water catchment plan. Today, the Maltese seem to understand this very well. Pipes of all lengths are literally carrying water to various areas without obviously enough bothering to ask permission from the original builders, who might, at the sight of this, faint or envy us for finally finding a real purpose to some unfinished job. The Maltese Islands have definitely been the center of some worldwide functioning network. Was Malta the Mecca of the Mediterranean? Did extraterrestrials read any special messages in our ruts? Were they filled with some energy-giving substance from space? Could they have chosen Malta to come to Earth to start what eventually led to the emergence of men? Is man the son of the gods? Did giants copulate with women in Malta to produce the first man-sized human? Von Daniken enthusiastically almost believes so, and he has our fat and sleeping ladies to prove it. The Genesis comes to his aid. In chapter 6, line 4, it says, "The sons of God saw the daughters of man, that they were fair, and they took them as wives." Chapter 100 of Kebra Nagast, the Ethiopian work, adds that every daughter of Cain with whom the angels had consorted became pregnant, but could not give birth, and died. They split their mother's womb and came out of the navel. When they were older and grew up, they became giants. These, together with the figures given by Baruch, lead us to believe that not only dinosaurs were extra-large creatures, but also humans. After all, Maltese fables do include stories about giants, not to mention the islands as being those of Cyclops, according to Homer. Some enthusiasts believe Malta might, after all, have been an amplifying post for cosmic energy, producing a bridge between the extraterrestrials and the first humans. In Greek mythology, one finds many stories related to giants. In these stories, gigantic bronze statues are mentioned. Their function was to exterminate their enemies. A study from Dougherty offers an explanation to these giants. He sees that a footprint of a giant was found near a dinosaur footprint. The simultaneous appearance of dinosaurs and man goes against the theory of Darwin. All this happened some 140 million years ago near the Paluxy River near Glen Rose in Texas. Did giants really exist in Malta during those times? Nonetheless, proof of giants seems to be emerging from several sites. Cart-rut sites are still widely misapprehended and consequently are often under threat from urban sprawl. Through a deeper understanding, cart-ruts may become a more understandable cultural component of Europe's rich archaeological heritage. Although quite a few findings have been made and tests carried out, an exact date and a precise purpose have not yet been fixed to Malta's cart-ruts. The Maltese of today are the guardians of this unknown treasure. We Maltese should be proud of our heritage. Indeed, we should plan some professional tests in future to get some answers to this colorful enigma. Until then, we can only speculate, hope, and proudly preserve a heritage, the value of which we do not really know yet.